Roll 'em. Alex
Roll 'em.
Rodriguez, my mentor, I would say.
Oh my goodness.
Welcome. I'm so happy to have you on this because this is my first Zoom recording of a podcast. I've done a ton of in-person podcasts, but you are the one I want to talk to at this very moment because you and I have talked a lot about um, the issue of age, and what do you know? It's the biggest issue in our political discourse right now. Let me just ask you first and foremost to give me an introduction. You have a long and honorable history in public service. I know that you served as an official in the Clinton administration. I know that you were the head of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. Did I say that right? Commission?
Yep, yep, you got
Okay.
that right.
You want to fill in some more? I know you did a lot of
Sure, sure.
organizing.
It's pretty simple. I like Barack Obama following me. I started off as a community organizer in the South End of Boston, where you were raised, and moved on to be the director of a community center, multi-service community center, basketball, swimming pool, after school programs, etc., counseling. And then went out downtown and worked for the United Way as vice president for communities at risk. And after that, I was a commissioner on the Commission Against Discrimination, and was asked by the courts and the parties to be court monitor for special education in Boston, to bring the school into compliance for special ed kids. 5 years I did that. And then I was licensed commissioner for the city of Boston. I mean, city of Cambridge. I gave out all the liquor licenses, et cetera, et cetera. I had all the licenses, pole and conduit. We wired the whole city because of the big dig. And then Bill Clinton asked me and my wife to join his administration. I did as deputy assistant commissioner, deputy assistant secretary uh, for administration. And the plus there was we gave America the last balanced budget because Clinton wanted it. And then I went on to run for Congress and lost in that race in Boston over 20 years ago, and started my own business, which was a consulting firm doing multiple stuff. Some of them I would have to kill you if I told you. And because we did DOD and but basically government contracting, helping, working with other firms who got in the door to help them figure out how you deal with deliverables, how you fulfill your contract in a positive way. And I did that for 13 years and sold the company to another company and did that for 4 years. And we've been retired now for, this is 24. So we've been fully retired since 15, but the last contract we took was in 2017. So you
All
can
right.
say I've
Well,
been,
you've been
go
you've
ahead.
been you've been busy, you've been retired, but I want to jump right into this issue with Biden because it's so interesting. Biden is someone who I respect a lot and who um, is working and living in a changing environment. It wasn't when it comes to kind of the role of politicians becoming more campaigning and visual presentation being more what people look at than actual governing and legislating. And I think that it's an interesting point we find ourselves in. I personally have always recognized that his strength is not necessarily in communication or articulating points and campaigning, but he seems to be a pretty effective politician. What's the moment you see right now with this debate controversy, and I know you're still actively involved in your local political Virginia environment. What's going on?
Well, let me back one step up and talk about your very acute point that you just made about the American people responding to visual. We are a community now, a country and a culture of uh, the internet,
Yep.
and we stream and we Zoom and we do everything. So we are very susceptible to what we see. Will Smith, the movie actor, smacked someone on stage during the Academy Award. Will Smith next movie did not do well. It was a great movie, but it didn't do well because people turned off Will Smith for that action. It didn't change his capacity to act. They now had a reason to not like Will Smith. The character of the American people is to lean first to not liking rather than liking. Among the American people is the Democratic Party and its constituents who want to love their candidates. Like is not good enough. You have to love your candidate. And you can differentiate an affection for Obama from those who watched him and give his keynote speech at the Democratic convention and those who never saw it. The ones who watched him love Obama. The others say, well, I like him, I like what he did, but, and they would be more likely to criticize him. There's data to substantiate what I'm saying. So, but bottom line, let's get to the isms, okay? Because I'm sure that's what you want to talk about is, how do we get to this ageism stuff? Well, as you mentioned earlier, I was chairman of the Commission Against Discrimination in Massachusetts. We protected people from all the isms. Most people know the isms as racism. That's just one of them. Sexism, ageism, anti-well of body-ism.
Ableism.
I don't like to use disabled, but anti those not well of bodyism. We have all ethnicism, religiousism. We have all of that. When I was a graduate student at the Heller School of Social Welfare at Brandeis University, I tried to do my dissertation on the isms as a mental illness, and they are. And I wanted to track the brain, as people have now tracked the brain for Alzheimer's, as to more racist, non-racist, because it is clear to me from the scientific background I have, and I was a student in mental health policy at Brandeis, that all of that comes from the same section of your brain. Just like we get up in the morning and you know your left foot from your right foot, left shoe from your right shoe, and you know which side of your car turns on the blinker and which side of the front of the console turns on the windshield wiper. That's distinguished in the discrimination part of your brain. And way back in the 70s, I wanted to study it, and my committee said it would be too expensive, too long, etc. So my proposal got denied.
They
But I
also
went
didn't
on.
have they also didn't have the imaging they have now.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Back then, I'm talking in the 70s.
Yeah.
All right, we're talking 50 years ago, and we didn't have the technology. And when I put my proposal together, the science people on my committee would say, well, how the hell are we going to pay for that? Where are you going to get the money? You'd have to get a $3 million grant just for that equipment. So it became a non-feasible thing to do at the time. But since then, I've stayed a student of discrimination as to the isms. And think about this. Ageism got out the door. Before that, it was pretty embarrassing if you uttered an ism, if you said something sexism or racism in a cocktail party. But all of a sudden, ageism became acceptable with Joe Biden. And then the conflict in Israel and Gaza broke out. And that was against a country called Israel and a territory called Gaza. Okay? Just like we fought with Afghans, it was a country called Afghanistan and the United States in America. We never heard, or tell me if you did, oh, those damn Afghans during that war. But we did hear, oh, those damn Jews. The ism escaped. You had a reason now to use the isms. Israel, Jewish, is fighting against Gaza, non-Jewish. And now you can use the ism, the Jews. So you can point to a Jew in America and say, you're responsible. That's the isms escaping. And when we let the isms loose, everyone is endangered. As you know, my brother was in a wheelchair just as you are, Paul. And my brother started the effort when he was president of the Paralyzed Veterans of America, being a Korean War veteran who was wounded in war and paralyzed, for accommodations, hotel accommodations, curb cuts, parking accommodations, building accommodations when you build, etc. At first, people say, "Oh, come on, there's not that many of you," or all of a sudden, it worked, and every mother in America thinks that curb cut was invented for her baby carriage. It wasn't. And all the efforts we all made to make sure that we consider those who are not well of body and don't have mobility, they're working. But they didn't work without an effort, and they didn't work without us raising the consciousness of people about disability. Likewise, Joe Biden has raised the consciousness of ageism. Is it sufficient enough to say he's old? Well, I'm 2 years older than Joe Biden. I'm 82 years old. I would have slammed dunk Donald Trump in that debate, because I debate differently than Joe Biden. I don't care about his excuse. It was deplorable. It was not a good debate. And anybody who tries to defend the debate by saying, well, he did say this, he did. Yes, but as you spoke earlier about vision, about what we see, it was deplorable. And at the meantime, Donald Trump was just lying his ass off, as he always does, and no one paid attention to that. Because, oh my God, the one we love and want to love, he tripped. And so all of a sudden it had to be related to his age, as opposed to the fact that he tripped. We all trip. Goes out the next day, makes a great speech in North Carolina, and has been running the government for 3.5 years plus every day. And at the moment we're talking now, he runs the government. And then, well, can he do it for 4 more years? Paul, I give you a business venture, and anybody that's in the room with you, let's pool our money and start a national lottery for everybody who questions whether he can do it for 4 more years. They would have to pick the day in the next 4 years he would die or become incapacitated. If they're right, they win 90% of the money everybody in the nation invests in the lottery. We take 10% for operating costs. If they're wrong, we keep all the money. My prediction is if we had this lottery in the next 4 years, we'd make out like a bandit. Joe Biden's not dying in the next 4 years. He's not going to be incapable of running the government in the next 4 years. He knows that, and I know that, and America should know that. It is ridiculous to impugn and set on an individual something that you got from setting on to a whole class of people, old people.
Yeah, I mean his one of the things that I think people, it's very difficult to, a lot of people have major, some of their top fears is public speaking. And when that much pressure is at on you and you're trying to kind of like um, figure out how in 90 seconds to fit in all the things that you feel like would answer the question that you're trying to kind of answer, it can be a challenge. And I think that,
And I'm going to overtalk you now. And that's what that's what Trump was doing in the background. He was overtalking, and you stopped talking. You didn't continue your point of view.
and there's
He
so
could
much
hear
about
it.
the way
And
that he, so many
that's,
things about the things that he's saying that are, worth reputing on several levels while you're sort of trying to fit in the answer to the other question at the same time. So, but I mean, I do think that unfortunately the role of politicians is changing, and I also think that there are some people who are masters at that, like Gavin Newsom. He's a fantastic communicator, and he's forceful.
absolutely.
He's forceful. He's concise. He's attractive. But I'm very interested in that concept you described of wanting to love your candidate and what that candidate's job is. Is it to be a lovable, representative that kind of like embodies all of the principles that you want to identify yourself by, or is
I,
it that he's a good negotiator and compromiser and can push legislation through that's going to actually make a difference, like all the stuff on
I,
infrastructure
I,
and chips?
I don't think it goes that deep. Your first point is where it's at. You want to be able to have him at your coffee table, at your kitchen table, and feel comfortable that you can talk to him.
Or point to him
And
as a representative of your own identity and your principles.
Joe came to
Monument.
my house 6 years ago. Joe was in my house. Joe Biden came in to do a political affair for the governor of Virginia, who was the last day before the election, Terry McAuliffe. And the last event was at my house in Annandale, Virginia. And he was Joe. Everybody who was in that house, the union members, the politicians, the elected officials, the funding people, my family, friends, he was Joe. He was a guy you could shake his hand, and it was hard for people to say Mr. President because he's Joe. And that's what they like about him. That's what they like. If people don't know that Joe, then they're seeing plastic. They're seeing this what you and I are seeing now on the screen. Our brains pretend it's three-dimensional, but it's one-dimensional. You know?
Isn't it interesting
And
though how things change where technology has made it so that there was a time when a politician could travel around the country and give different speeches based on the different parts of the country he was in. Nowadays it's the other end of the spectrum where anything you say anywhere can be isolated, and so that's why you end up with these politicians who sometimes feel unrelatable because they're so afraid of saying anything wrong. I specifically think about my own former mayor, Eric Garcetti, who at one point was actually jumping in the race in 2016 because he was a young, really, really technocratically strong candidate and grew up inside Los Angeles politics. His father's Gil Garcetti. But this issue of age is really fascinating, not just because of Biden, but because of the demographics we have. How are we gonna? Are the whole concept of America is we don't think about aging, but we're going to have to in a big way. And I don't think his point about care for children and care for elders is something that people are ready to actually grasp what's going to be involved.
It's a big struggle that this nation is going to have to deal with. On the one
And
hand,
denial about.
yeah, on the one hand, we have on the Republican side and with the other candidate an insistence on diminishing the only population that is growing the American population, and that is immigrants. Because if you close the door today to immigration, the United States in 50 years would go from 308 million people to probably 300 million people. Fewer taxpayers, fewer people buying into Social Security, paying in. It would be a disaster if we had that policy that the other side is enunciating now. I mean, they don't mean it seriously. They just want to be tough and say, those people who are taking your job should be kept out. Yeah, I look around at the tobacco fields down here in the South, and I look around at the grapes fields, etc. I don't notice a great deal of white people working in those fields.
Or black
They're
people.
they're brown people or black people. They're brown people who take those jobs. And so nobody's taking anybody's job. And at the end of every summer, when it comes gathering time for the farmers, they're pissed off because their application for extra workers didn't get processed. And so they're sitting there watching food wasting on the vine. And that's because of our immigration policy. Now, we almost got it right because Republicans jumped in and said, let's fix this. And at the last minute, Donald Trump killed it because he told the Republicans not to vote for that. I need immigration as an issue because my population that supports me is stupid enough not to hear what I'm doing. In other words, I am adding the other ace into my hand right in front of them so that I end up winning with 4 aces and they don't notice it. And I'm sorry I used the word stupid, but I don't know another word to define that population. Hillary Clinton said,
Scared?
Hillary scared. Hillary Clinton said 50% of those people who voted for Donald Trump and beat her were deplorables. Well, let's do the numbers. 76 million people voted for Donald Trump. Okay, that would make it 33, no, 43, whatever it
76?
is.
Frankie, what's half of
Yeah,
76?
48 million people. I
37.
mean, 37 million, 38 million people. And my math got messed up because I'm old. 38 million people it would have taken to be deplorable. Now, think about it. Do you think there are not 38 million people who are deplorable in this country? I do. Out of 308 or 80 million people that we have, come on. I meet those deplorable people every day and I met them in business and I met them in government and I met them sitting at a desk when I was teaching at Harvard, when I was teaching at MIT. I met these kids and I met their parents. They're deplorable. They were raised in a deplorable fashion. And what's deplorable? More hate than love. Be against than for. Don't trust rather than trust, etc. And when you band them all together and you let the racists out of the closets with their ism and the sexists out of the closet with their isms, and you let the ages out of the closet with their ism, and they form a group called MAGA, they're now with their kissing cousins. And then everyone has 6 degrees of separation. You and I do. You know, you're in LA, I'm in Virginia, but you have two brothers that worked on my campaign when I went for Congress. That's 1 degree of separation. Your mother's been a lifelong friend of mine. That's another degree of separation. You know, we know the same population, and what we do affects those people within our 6 degree sphere of knowledge, and so do the MAGA people. They affect other people now. So I'm not surprised the numbers are where they are in polls.
They also grew up with an incredibly horrible diet. In some ways, I have compassion and um, you know the outcomes of being sort of manipulated and having their instincts targeted and manipulated by not only their consumption of food but of media and fear mongering. I want to maybe talk to you about some of the things that are going on out here and get your sense and maybe a little history. Just yesterday, I interviewed a guy whose family was uprooted from their homes for the construction of the Dodger Stadium. It was a chapter in LA history and in the Chicano movement that I've heard described as important, and it also kind of reflects the larger history of people being displaced in this all over, but especially in the Southwest. Can you talk a little bit about the history of what some people call the Chicano political movement, and also about Betty's role and her family's history in some of the stuff that happened on this side of the country and how it intersects with the stuff that was happening on your side of the country when you were growing up in New York? And I know there's a famous photo that I want to show of you walking alongside Martin Luther King. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, let's go back and start with Betty's history. Betty's Chicana. She's doesn't identify as Mexican.
My free meeting will end. It said I'm getting a notice that says my free meeting will end in 10 minutes. I may have to upgrade this. Can I just upgrade?
Why don't you upgrade?
That's all right. I'll do it. I can do. Are you there, Alex?
I'm there.
All right. I'm just gonna, while we're doing this, I'm just gonna get my upgrade.
The recording's then gonna also have this in there too. So I wouldn't put your info in there. I can cut it out. I can cut out from that point on where it said meeting to now, because I'm assuming you don't want to put your info
on the public. All right. No, we'll do Alex.
We'll click off and come back.
Yeah, but yeah, let's do that.
Okay, I'm here. You click off and give me the link again.
Okay.
And I'll link back in.
And maybe you can grab a couple of photos and just show them to the camera. I want that photo.
Before we leave, how would I do that from my phone?
Oh, no, all you got to do, I'm talking about your physical photos. You can just sort of like,
yeah, but I'm saying, how would I do that? What I'm saying, let me go to my photos. How could I do it?
I was thinking of the photos that you have that are like on your wall, that are like physical photos that you could just sort of like hold up to the computer screen.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying I have those on my phone.
Okay, well that could work too.
Yeah, that's what I would like to see. Let me try one. Let me try one before you get off.
Okay.
Let's try the photo that you're talking about.
Okay. Now,
can you
help me with this a little bit? I'm not seeing my
Can you see this? There it is. You see that one?
Sorry.
Does that work?
There we go. Bring it over a little bit more to your. There you go. Okay. Let's see. Now, what I see here is Alex Rodriguez, but it looks like maybe the photos not. Put your camera sideways.
Ah.
But hold it sideways because I think Martin Luther King is not showing up.
Okay. Okay. How's this one?
Hold it up higher.
I'm gonna try.
Okay, that's perfect right there.
That's the wrong one. Oh, come on, I just had it. Where did it go? Here it is. Okay. Does that work?
If you hold it up a little higher. And then towards
Okay.
the other direction. Yeah, a little more, a little more. There we go, right
There it
there.
is.
Okay. Oh, there's Martin Luther. I'm sorry, you're in there. Yep, there's Martin Luther King to the right. And you're on the
Yep,
left.
that's me right
Looking
there.
young and tough.
Yeah. I was doing security for this march we organized in Boston in 1965, before you were born.
If you just touch the picture, everything else around it will go from light to dark, and it'll look a little better. So try and just tap the photo a little bit.
I don't know.
A little more. Try and tap it one more time.
Oh,
it
got too big. Yeah, it got
cool.
too big. I got it.
I got it.
All right.
All right. I'm gonna end this Zoom call and call you. Oh, there
Okay,
it is.
you can
Higher.
there.
Higher.
Hiya. I thought you were saying hello in Boston. Hiya. There's Martin.
And over towards you a little bit. There you are.
It's too big.
No, it's good. There we go.
There
we go.
There you are.
Alex doing security for MLK in Boston. Beautiful. All right, well,
Yeah,
we'll do this thing right here, and then I'll call you I'll send you the link, okay?
Okay, so I'll disappear now, and I'll wait for the link.
Got it. Thanks.
So you were at the Chicana stuff. You were asking about Betty's background.
Your wife, Betty Baca.
Yeah, Betty Baca belongs to the Baca family. Betty, you can look her up on Wikipedia, spelled Bettie. She comes from a rather interesting family. Her mom and pa didn't graduate high school. They were farm workers, beet farm. They settled in
In the Colorado area?
Greeley, Colorado. And his family came from northern New Mexico. Her family came from Colorado. That's my wife's parents. And people little know the history of this country in terms of geography. There were 13 colonies. They became the United States. In 1782, the Constitution was ratified, et cetera, et cetera. And everything west of those 13 colonies was something else. It wasn't America. It belonged to somebody. The Spanish claimed part of it, the French, no Mexicans at that time, because Mexicans didn't exist at that time. The concept of a Mexican state only existed in terms of American territory for 20 years. Remember, the war against Mexico, or to take Mexican territory, ended in 1848. And 20 years earlier, Mexico became a country, because before that, it was French with Napoleon holding it. And before that, it was Spanish. And people don't think about the history of the Southwest. California was a totally independent entity, had nothing to do with Mexico, And the Spanish that moved to California didn't incorporate as a country. They just built their fields, et cetera. They didn't care about it, and everyone sort of thinks that, well, if I step over a border and no one claims it, I have to make it a country. That wasn't thinking at the time. The thinking was taking care of your family, growing your crops, getting your food. It's not until the Monroe Doctrine sticks in, and until President Tyler, that the ugly stuff really starts, and the intentional taking and going of America. And all that, you can, if you want to read about it, I would recommend two books. One is the Imperial Cruise by Bradley. Bradley is the son of one of the people that raised the flag at Iwo Jima. And that talks about imperialism in a way that is the most honest I've ever read it. And then before that, it's Santiago, or no, Juan Garcia. Juan, what the hell's his name? Juan Gonzalez, Juan Gonzalez book. Just, I got to look at the title. Hold on.
Alex is giving us some history of the Southwest.
Harvest of Empires by Juan
Harvest
Gonzalez.
of Empires by Juan Gonzalez.
And if you read both of those books, Juan Gonzalez, after you read Off Before, in order, I think you get a sense of what imperialism, intentional imperialism, was all about and is all about, and still exists in the United States in a modified form, in which the Soviet Union, or the all Soviet Union, Russia, wants to gain back certain status through its imperialistic growth, and the United States does it through alliances and treaties. You know, we don't have anyone that's going to allow us to take off planes and bomb other South Asian countries between Afghanistan or Kazakhstan and South Korea in the Middle East. So we have one good friend, Israel. So that's the aircraft carrier we have that we can fly into and then be in striking distance of these other countries. But imperialism is a whole different subject. Going back to Chicanos in the Southwest, Betty's family grew up and identified as Spanish more than Mexican, because there was no Mexican ownership of Greeley, Colorado. Greeley, Colorado came in with the Northwest Territory, came in as part of the Louisiana Purchase. They were French, etc. And we have an expression, I'm Puerto Rican, and we didn't immigrate to Ellis Island, and Betty's Chicana, and they didn't immigrate to Ellis Island. We have an expression that goes, you know, we never crossed the border crossed us. We were always where we were. And unlike your family, I can trace you back to Ireland, and I can trace you back to your mother's grandparents, because she knows all that. And in doing so, we find out that you had the island continued existence from which your parentage comes from, your mother would have been queen. She would have been queen of a country.
Inishmurray.
Because,
The island
what
of
did you say?
The island of Inishmurray.
Inishmurray, yeah. And she would have been the queen of Inishmurray, and you might have been king. But a hurricane took care of that, didn't it? And so heritage is a very interesting thing. The Chicano movement grows from the fact that there's a population in this country from the Rio Grande north to the Canadian border that are Mexican American background, Spanish American background, French American background,
indigenous
background. And as Betty says, she can trace a Spanish American background back to 1513.
Wow.
To Cabeza de Vaca. And they have the family chart, and there's a museum in Colorado called the Baca Museum, and it's in southeastern Colorado, and you can go to the Baca Museum and you can see that whole heritage. But Betty, as you just said, Betty says that's if you're interested in the European heritage. If you're interested in the Native American heritage, you've got to go back 15,000 years for when her parentage walked over the ice caps. So we have a real misunderstanding of Chicanos. We have a misunderstanding. they're folk who've always been here. They didn't come. They've been here. They evolved here. And they evolved because of losing wars with great oppression. And it's why if you go back to a TCM movie that is pre-1940, you don't see any Chicanos in the movie. You don't see black people in the movie. You just see white people in the movie. Every cowboy movie you'd see, it's like those folk didn't exist. No Chinese people, no black people, no, and they were 1/3 of the population.
I want to actually footnote that because this neighborhood that I'm in right now is where a lot of the early movies in the movie studios were based. And
Yep.
It's been a very interesting experience coming from the East and landing just maybe coincidentally here and seeing some of this, what served as the sets for the movies that I grew up watching on the weekends, Westerns, and seeing how the land was so, this particular spot in LA was so habitable with
Yep.
actual water and rivers and beautiful fertile soil and hills and breezes and sunlight, and it's just fantastic. And it goes into all of the, I think all of the kind of the conscious vision we have growing up in this mediated sort of culture. But I want to get back to the sort of more political involvement that Betty's family had, and also just how the experience of being uprooted from Chavez Ravine, which followed and echoed the experience of people here being uprooted and displaced, played into their civic engagement.
Well, you think about this. She was upgraded on her Native American side, which from the movies you saw about how Native Americans were treated in the country, and almost complete genocide, and and therefore mestizo happens. You're mixed, and you survive as you survive. But her family, it was very interesting because her great uncle is Felipe de Vaca, and he's got kicked out of northeastern New Mexico by the cowboys. He was a sheep man, and you know how the conflict between the cowboys and the sheep is. The sheep raiders. That's what's the movie song from Oklahoma, or is it? One of the Roger and Hammersteins from the Cowboys and the farmers should be friends, And he got kicked out. He had 400 sheep, and he went across the border to southern Colorado, and he found a little-known river that nobody knew that flowed out there, and so it was a perfect place to raise his sheep.
Wow.
Because they were constantly by water. And within 10 years, that became 4,000 sheep. And between 20 years, it became 400,000 sheep, which he raised in a partnership with an Anglo guy from the East. And they provided lamb and sheepskin. And they had a big industry there. And when Felipe de Vaca died, he was the richest person in southeastern Colorado in the county called Baca County. And his wife was named Trinidad, and Trinidad is the county seat now, not of Baca County because they split the counties, but it's the county seat there now. And he got elected to the legislature and was against statehood. And he was against statehood over the issue of free states and slave states. And he didn't want Colorado to become a slave state. So he fought against it. He was a Republican. 60 years to the day he got elected, Betty's sister became the first Latina elected to the Colorado legislature. The first woman, and she became a rep, and the only Latina that was both an assemblywoman and a senator. And she served in the Colorado Senate for 8 years, or 10 years, actually. And that's Polly Baca, and you can look her up in Wikipedia. And Betty and Polly got very involved in politics from a very young age because their father was very political and their uncle was very political. And they worked at the local town committees, et cetera, et cetera. And Polly then became, after years, the vice president of the National Democratic Party when Chuck Manette was chairman. And Polly is the only person in this country who's been to every Democratic convention since 1964 in an official role. And I've been to Democratic conventions, but I missed the Carter Kennedy one, so I don't have a string, and I didn't start till 68. In fact, my anniversary of attending Democratic conventions is this year. I'll be going to Chicago, and that's where I started, with supporting Gene McCarthy in 1968. And so I've been involved in that time. But Betty's involvement, Polly's involvement is interesting because Betty worked for the National Democratic Party for 8 years. She was the executive director of not the years it began, but a couple of years after it began, of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And she then later became a Clinton appointee, and she was exec sec with Ron Brown, who knew her because they worked at the Democratic Party together. And he became Secretary of Commerce. He died in a plane crash in Bosnia. And she also was counselor to the administrator of the Small Business Administration. And her sister went on to be regional director of General Service Administration, GAS, and GSA, I mean. And so we've been very involved in politics, all of us. I knew Betty's sister, Polly, in 1968, not knowing Betty existed. And I didn't meet Betty till 1986. So almost 20 years I knew her sister, but I didn't know her. And the politics of their family is very interesting because they influenced a lot of change in Colorado, and that change still holds. There's a highway you can take from Denver to Aspen, Colorado, that everybody said couldn't be built. And the environmentalists didn't want it built because it would mess up the environment. And Polly voted on the legislation that made that possible. And if you drive it, it's amazing what they did architecturally to maintain the integrity of the environment. Wow. And so they've been environmentalists, they've been housing advocates, they've been advocate for social service programs, they've been advocate for good immigration policy. The family has been there. Polly, her sister, has held elective office. But while she was holding an elective office, Betty was working for her, implementing, making sure that it got done. And especially when they were in the National Democratic Committee. During that time, they knew everybody, any name you can mention in 60-year-old Latino advocacy history, they knew. Cesar Chavez, good personal friend. His granddaughter is running the campaign for Biden right now. Very few people know that. But Cesar's granddaughter is a good friend of theirs. Cesar's second, a woman, the name escapes me right now, was very famous. Si se puede. Oh, come on, Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta is a personal good friend. Henry Cisneros came up as a good friend. Congressman Richardson, former Governor Richardson, former Secretary of the United Nations.
Becerra.
Becerra is a personal friend. He's been to our dining room table.
He was my congressman.
Yeah, and he's
the district I live in. It changed the boundaries, but
said hello the other day, but Bill Richardson came and asked Betty to tell him how he could run for Congress and to help him out when he first ran for Congress. And he ran for president, Uh, all these people, I can go on and mention tons of names. The development of the Southwest Council, which became La Raza, which is now Nuestro, they knew all the founders. Her brother-in-law was the lawyer to draw up the first chartering papers for that organization. Betty was a founder of MANA, Mexican American National Women's Association, which is now changed but is still in existence. That's 60 years old. Just incredible stuff that they did throughout their lives. You're talking about in LA, famous riots happened in LA, and a famous journalist. Huh?
The Zoot Suit riots?
Well, yep. And in those days, yep, you would have called them that. I forgot the name they give it to, but the Chicano movement gives to it. And a journalist who was writing and advocating for the Chicano community was purposely killed by the LA police that day. They went into the bar he was in. They asked where he was. They shot him. And they said somebody else did it during the riot. And it's all documented. You can find, there's the BPS, public television films on all of this, you can find out. But going back to the issue of the day, which is the election of a president, we've got to think hard about the image you talked about earlier. We've got to think hard about not allowing image to supplant production. Production is what Joe Biden's done. Joe Biden has produced. You can look at the economic numbers he produced. You can look at inflation he produced. He's getting it down. You can go to the grocery store and look at your food prices, and it doesn't seem the same. They're higher. Those prices are going to stay the same. They're not going to change. It's a function of the reality of economics. It's a function of, on the one hand, I don't know if you've done it in California, but you move to a salary for restaurant workers. Have they done that in some of your cities? They've done that here. You do that, it changes the money it costs you to produce a sandwich. You have to pay for that difference. You got to pay. And at the same time, the meat and the cheese costs more money and the milk costs more money because the fixed inflation has locked in now. And that's not a function of Donald Trump's, disaster during COVID, nor a function of George Bush before him. It's a function of the reality of economics. That's why when you see in 1930 movies, they say, I'll give you a job, 50 cents a day, and they get excited. 50 cents a day. 50 cents a day has been inflated. It's not 50 cents a day anymore. It's what the inflation rate has taken 50 cents to over 70 years. And inflation happens everywhere. And the president who's sitting there when it happens gets blamed. So Biden's going to get blamed for that. And so you can stick him with inflation. And he had a 90-minute debate where he didn't do well. And I'm not so sure he's going to live 4 years. But he did infrastructure. He did healthcare.
That's one that's hard. People don't the infrastructure investment and the chips stuff. I don't think people understand the investment.
It's not going to hit us for years. When you're building a house, it takes time. So you can have the plans in front of you, and you can show your grandchildren and the children this house that they're going to inherit, but it's not built. You got to build it. And we're in a new age now, and everything that Donald Trump did that Joe Biden did in his first 3 years had to be with undoing what Donald Trump did, the disaster he left him with. Remember, there was no transition in government. So that took time to get your foot in the door. And then the transition happened, and Joe Biden's done magnificent stuff. There's no president before who's produced like this, not even Lyndon Johnson, who's the last president that redesigned America with,
In an environment of hyper partisanship.
Mm-hmm. Right. And Lyndon Johnson had votes. Joe Biden doesn't. He had to struggle for every program, proving what a great politician. Listen, the man went into the Senate at 28 years old. Okay, that's 52 years of political experience. He knows what he's doing.
Serving as the chair of the Foreign Policy Committee.
Yeah, and he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, where I didn't like him. I didn't like him when he really beat up on Anita Hill when Clarence Thomas was being, nominated. I didn't like what he did there. But in 52 years, I can't point out a lot that I don't like. I can point out tons of stuff I like that he did. And he deserves to continue being president. And then let's just lock in the opposition. The opposition opens his mouth and he's a liar. We know the moment he's talking, he's going to lie. He's a rapist, named in a civil case as a rapist, in which he's paying $400,000+ in penalties. He's a fraud.
Million, not thousand, not 100,000. By the way, I also want to mention, and I'm not. I want to maintain. I want to interview people from different sides of every issue, but I also want to mention that the bankruptcies. What is it? 5 bankruptcies.
Oh, yeah, bankruptcy and the fraud he's committed, the failed corporations, his university, etc. We can go down the whole list. The insurrectionist that he is. He's 34 times a felon. Okay, 34 times a felon. My father was 1 time a felon and couldn't work in the New York City docks after that. He had to ship out as a merchant seaman because he couldn't work down the street from where we lived because he had a felony. And what was the felony? Selling marijuana in 1937 when it became illegal. He was selling it in 36 when it was legal. Nobody told him it was illegal. And when it became illegal, the policemen, 2 policemen that he come and buy it for the police station every Friday. He sold it to them and they arrested him that Friday.
Wow.
And he said, "What are you doing? I'm selling it to you." They said, "Well, we've got an order to pick all you sellers up." You can read that. It was Mr. Anslinger, who did Reefer Madness, the movie, who was responsible to convince Governor Roosevelt to do it, and but 1 felony, you can't get a job in government. They're not going to take you in the military. You can't work on the waterfront. This guy's got 34 felonies and he's going to run the United States of America after he's telling everybody that he's going to be a dictator. And he's going to go and punish everybody who's his enemy. And you might be one of them with this podcast. He might say, "I don't like Paul Bowers." And it's the old story of Adolf Hitler. They first came and got the gypsies and nobody complained. Then they got the homosexuals and nobody complained. And then they got the Catholics and nobody complained. And then they got the Jews and nobody complained. And then they came for me and there's nobody left to complain. And that's what we've got to look forward to. And we've got to sell that to the voter, that you have a choice here, and it's either Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And don't tell me I have a third choice. You don't. If you take a third choice, it's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, that's like a really good place for us to wrap up, and I would like to continue doing this some more if you're open to it. Um, this has been great. I'm uh, really looking forward to focusing in on some specifics, like some stories about Boston and your experience there. So I'm going to send you a series of times. Maybe next week we could do it again, or the week after that.
Sure,
All right.
sure. My nephew just died
I'm
two
sorry.
years, no, 2 years ago, and
Oh,
we buried the ashes earlier this month. Well, in June. This is July, yeah. And we went out and buried his father, and he died in the same week.
wow.
And that's Polly Vaca's husband and her son. And she's kept the ashes for 2 years. He was a DJ out there, and he did a talk show on the weekends, and people loved him. And the basis of his talk shows, he had an interesting name for it. The name was one thing, but he would introduce it this way. He says, "We're the nobodies that know somebody and believe we know something, and we're going to talk to you for 1 hour. So we're welcoming all the nobodies out there to call in." And whenever he get a university professor, he said, "This is not the intellectual show." Ordinary people, you
Yeah.
know. Paul, you're calling at a good time, because I'm going to send you in probably a month my first draft of my memoirs from the day I was born to the day I went to college.
Oh my
And
God.
and I'm going to be publishing that next year. And so I'd like you to comment on it when I send you.
That's fabulous. I'm sure I'll have a lot of like
You know,
stories that I want to pick prod your memory about.
yeah, I'm gonna send it online, and you can read it online, okay, chapter by
Beautiful.
chapter, and tell me what you think.
Awesome. 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 Great.
Okay.
Now,
All right, take it easy, guys. I'll click out of here. All right. I don't know how to do it, but I'll get out somehow.